Hello and welcome to Activating Magic. I'm Darla LeDoux, your host, and I'm here with my dear friend and soul sister, Maggie Ostara. Hi, Maggie.
Hi, Darla. Hi, everybody. Glad to be
Thank,
here. Yay.
thank you for being here. Y'all, I've known Maggie y'all, by the way, is what I picked up from living in Texas. I've known Maggie for almost 15 years. It's been we were little babies starting our businesses together, joining Mastermind and all of that. And just always appreciated Maggie's authenticity. I really didn't know how much I was going to grow into talking about magic, being magical. But, I remember we were in the program together where Maggie was often being told, don't be so magical. Nobody's going to understand that. So I just love, where we've come to as a culture and that you've stood by your values and what you believe in. So I'm really excited. I'm going to just share your formal bio a bit. Maggie is a recovering academic and she has her PhD. She left her prestigious job as the director of women's and gender studies at Columbia University when she realized she was not meant to work for anyone else. She now knows this is part of her human design. Maggie is the author of the international bestseller, Feminine Sovereignty. I brought my copy with me today. It's gorgeous, gorgeous. The subtitle of the book is The 8 Pillars for Regenerating Ourselves and Our World. She's an arousing public speaker, beloved teacher, highly intuitive and skilled mentor coach. When clients work with her, they deepen their sense of destiny and true value. They develop their feminine sovereignty and live into their own definitions of success. Maggie's a certified quantum human design specialist level 4, a certified clarity breathwork practitioner, a certified radiant body yoga teacher, and a certified teacher of intentional creativity. She's an online education expert and creator of the 8 Pillars of Feminine Sovereignty and the 6 Feminine Sovereign Archetypes. She's served tens of thousands of students and hundreds of clients all over the world through her online programs. And we'll put some links to connect with Maggie below, but I love reading that so much. And I love that, we were studying online business when we met. And since I've known you, you were always a breathwork practitioner, but you've added the yoga and human design. And I just love the way they all come together. So there's a lot of dimensions to you, I would say. And I feel like I want to acknowledge anyone listening who relates to that, who has various modalities that they bring together. And it's like, before we started recording, it's like, well, what do we want to talk about? Because there's so many directions that we could go. So how do you want to be known as we're just starting out here today?
I feel really connected to being an advocate for women in particular, but I've worked with non-binary and trans people and men and all kinds of different people, but really an advocate for women to meet themselves really deeply on the inner landscape and to be able to be clearing out all the other voices that sometimes impact them so that they can get really clear about their own inner guidance. Because when you get connected to your own inner guidance, you stop giving your power away. You stop looking outside of yourself for approval and recognition and other people to tell you who you are or what you should do. And that's probably the core thing that I'm really about. All the different modalities that I do, all the different, I might call them realms of sovereignty. All of those are different avenues and tools and support systems to help us to do that. So that's really what I'm about. I'm really about personal empowerment through sovereignty so that we can become sovereign stewards of our planet. That just in this time here, we really need to be showing up in ways that we can help to heal our planet and help heal our relationships with each other and with the living world. And so that's the other piece. And my experience is generally when people do get connected to their inner guidance and they are able to really like unravel some of that conditioning, they do want to serve, they do want to contribute. Like this is a core impulse that most of us have, right? But sometimes we stop, or we get pulled into like getting focused on just making money and thinking money is going to bring us happiness or success. And a lot of times I've talked to people who've created a lot of money, and I've experienced this where I was like, yeah, I created money, but I'm not happy. So it's
Yeah.
like finding what really is the thing and then providing our service out into the world. So that's, yeah, kind of the core of what I'm about.
I love it. You know, I got to be an advanced reader of the book. It's so beautiful how you weave in Mother Earth into really empowerment of self.
Mhm.
And, you know, I've not read anything that was that seamlessly connected like that. And I'm curious, when you were writing Feminine Sovereignty, how did you know that was going to be a foundational piece, or did that come in later?
Well, I've been working with the concept of sovereignty in relation to self for 25 years.
Mhm.
And most of that had to do with evolving ourselves on the inner landscape, right? It had to do with personal empowerment. And over time, I started to realize personal empowerment is great. Like we need to feel our power within so that we can have agency in the outer world. But then over time, and especially the last 5 years or so, I started to realize like we develop our sovereignty. So what? Like for what? Like what is, why are we doing that? Like what does it matter? Right. And too often I would see people, and I started seeing this narrative coming in from other people using the term sovereignty really just to become bigger consumers. You know, we need to make more money. We're going to consume more. We're going to have bigger houses. We're going to have bigger cars. We're going to travel all over the world, you know, without any understanding about how that fits into where we are as a global community at this point. And so I was like, you know what? It's not about that. That's why I also named it feminine sovereignty, because I'm like, no, it's not about so you empower yourself to become a bigger consumer. It's really about empowering ourselves so that we can get clear about our true history and our relationship to the planet and to what we call nature. A lot of times people think nature is out there. Like I look
Yeah.
out my window, I see an oak tree, I think that's nature. It's not me. But that's not true. We are nature. We are expressions of nature.
Mhm.
And that separation that a lot of us got trained into is a big reason that our planet is in as much trouble as it is right now, because we think that it's separate and we think we can control it and manipulate it and extract from it kind of forever. That's kind of been the idea, right? And we're finding that we actually can't do that. And we're creating a lot of toxicity, and we're creating a lot of, I mean, the most recent, Darla, most recent statistic I saw was that 80% of people in the United States have a chronic disease. 80% have a chronic condition.
Wow.
It's huge,
Yeah.
right? And why is that? A lot of that has to do with our disconnection from the living world.
Mm.
And so, you know, and eating toxic food, drinking toxic water, drinking toxic air, all of that, right? And we think we're separate. And it's important to like break down that and really question it. And so that came more and more and more into my awareness and my consciousness. And then when the 8 pillars came in the form that they're in now, that came in COVID in 2020, where it just kind of crystallized into that form. And pillar number 3 is vitality and our relationship to the living world. And the recognition that our embodiment, our form, our physical form, right, is made up of the earth, right? What are we but water and minerals with some fat thrown in? Like that's kind of what we are, right? Animated by spirit, animated by magic, right? Spiritual
Yes.
magic. And
Mhm.
so in pillar 3, what I really wanted to do was to help us see how much we actually are always related. And there's different practices I've done, like continuum movement, where we through a deep meditative process, we can connect to the fluids in our body, and then how the fluids in our body are relating to the ocean, the fluids in the ocean, or the watersheds that are near us, or what, like we can actually, because all the water everywhere resonates with itself.
Yeah.
Right. And so we can actually tap into that and recognize, wow, yes, I am resonating with the ocean. Right. And so, like, we've got a river here. I live near the ocean. I can tap into those things. And when we do that, it changes our perception about who we are as a human being here on the planet. And we start to recognize that we are actually a part of the whole unfolding of what's happening. For me, that's a big part. When we can actually do that, it makes it really difficult for us to go on doing things that are harming the planet, because we're recognizing, oh gosh. And also, like when I mentioned chronic disease, when we realize, oh, why do I have chronic fatigue, or why do I have thyroid issues, or why do I have, fibromyalgia, or why do I have, mast cell activation, all these things that people are experiencing, where are those coming from? And it's like the earth is hurting, and so are we. And so recognizing this kind of primary relationship, I think, can really help us with our own personal health, right? And our vitality. But then also help us to connect with who we can be as stewards.
I love this direction, Maggie. And I'm thinking about, Stephanie, who's a mutual friend, was here recently. And so where I live in Colorado is very close to Aspen, which is, one of the most expensive places to live, and have all the designer shops and all of that. We typically will go there, and we go to this particular consignment shop, which, in Aspen is a lot of really fabulous things. One of the things she said is everybody walking through Aspen looks like they just put on brand new clothes. And it's true. There's like this crisp feeling about it. Yeah, we had a really deep discussion about this, because I remember when we met and we were kind of growing up learning about abundance and charging what you're worth and all of that. And there was definitely an undertone of wastefulness, right? Like, just get a new one. Just get a new one. And so we had a pretty deep conversation about that recently. So how do you feel like tuning into feminine sovereignty helps that? Or helps us know, right? Like, when am I being limited in my thinking? And when am I being conscientious and helpful of the earth?
Right. Well, that's just such an important inquiry, isn't it? Right. I don't know that there's a formula for that other than inquiry. I was just thinking in relation to what you just said, there's a account, I can't remember the name of it now, on Instagram that I started following, but it has to do with it's like ecological fashion or something like that.
Yes.
And they were talking about how the fashion industry is one of the largest contributors to climate change. And that really, if you look at what the planet can afford, we can afford 6 new pieces of clothing a year. That's what the planet can actually tolerate.
What a good measure.
Right? Isn't that interesting? So I love that you went to a consignment shop.
Yes.
Right? Because you weren't buying new clothes.
Right.
We have clothes swaps. We do like, there's so much good, still usable clothing that's available.
Totally.
I mean, it's everywhere. Every time we do a clothes swap, there's so much clothing, and so much of it we end up giving away. Like, we don't even use it all. People bring bags of clothes, So when I look at that, I go, it's excess, right? It's excess. It's so more than we need. It almost gets a little grotesque, honestly, when we're sitting there looking at the clothes swap and we're going, look at all this clothes, right? And so when you're discerning between where am I limited and where am I being conscientious, right? To me, that's a moment, right, where I get to go, it affirms for me every time I'm going to shop at the clothes swap, right? And it encourages all of us, because we all bring really good clothes, right? Because maybe you've been to a clothes swap and there was just like things with rips and stains, whatever. And you're kind of like, really? I don't, I could just go to a, thrift store for that. But we bring really good clothes. So I think there's a lot of opportunities like that when we can go, do I really need, like, do you really need a new phone every year? Like, really? Like, no, you don't, right? But people want to. This is our consume, right? I hold on to a phone until it doesn't work anymore for me, basically, right? Or I hold on to a computer until it doesn't work for me anymore. And then I also make sure to recycle all the precious metals because that's a big issue with electronics. And my life is made up of electronics. So I try to be really conscientious about the electronics, right? So it's kind of where are the places in your life, if you're going to think about this for yourself, look at the places where you consume, right? And ask the question, right? Am I limiting myself? Are there more things I could engage in? Or am I being more conscientious here or responsible? I even like to think of it as being responsible.
Yeah.
And even our relationship to travel changing dramatically. There's a lot of things that are going to have to change in the next 10 years because if we're going to meet the targets for eliminating climate change or just addressing climate change, we have to change a lot of our habits, and some travel is one of them. So it's another place where you want to go. Okay, well, am I just going to jump on a plane whenever I feel like it because I've got the money and I can do that? Or is it like, do I really need to drive, or could I or fly? Like you're going to drive to Denver. You could fly to Denver, but you're not. You're going to drive your car. Right. And you're doing it to pick up other people. So there's going to be multiple people involved. Right. And so it's kind of that thing, just to stop and pause and think for a moment and go, what am I consuming?
Yeah.
What's the not just the carbon footprint, but also the toxicity that's involved? Because that's the other thing about the fashion industry. It's full of toxins, and most of the clothes are full of toxins also. So it's like, so I buy organic clothes, like I don't buy a lot of clothes, but when I buy them, I buy organic clothes made by a designer I love, small production, not big, brands and all that. And I don't do it a lot. So that's one of the things I do. So it's kind of like there's lots of places you can look. I mean, another thing that I did, I love books. I grew up with books. I grew up in an intellectual, I love books. You know what? I got a Kindle. And mostly I'm reading on a Kindle now.
Yeah.
Because I just went, this is trees. This is trees. I mean, I tried to get recycled paper and all of that.
And you got the trees on the cover.
I got the tree on the cover. Yeah, right. The tree's on the cover, right? But I started reading on a Kindle because I was like, okay, I want to stop that consumption and the production of more and more books. So there's always a place you can look at in your life and be like, do I really need to do it like that? How could I do it different? And not to make yourself bad and wrong if you were doing it different before, but it's more just about awakening up to the context and the implications and the consequences of your behavior. And because we live in a culture whose economy relies on us being consumers, we have to be intentional about it, right? Because all the messages we get are like consume, right? You have to really, and this is where that power within comes, right? So you have to build the power within so that you can resist that kind of onslaught that we get. Like a lot of people, like their friggin' way of dealing with emotions is retail therapy.
Well, and a lot of, the world that we got trained up in was very much like this is what had me down this train of thought this morning. I was wearing a new crisp white t-shirt this morning. I was feeling cute and like it was just new, right? I spilled coffee on it. And then I was very sad. And then I was like, it's never going to look this crisp again. Right. And then I started thinking about the people in Aspen with their brand new clothes. And I remember when we were training to host events and getting the training to say, like, when you shop, buy two of something because you don't want the one that you wear on stage to ever look tired. So I was thinking how my white shirt's now going to look tired and how, why is that a thing? Why is that a signal of your sense of abundance?
But even more insidious than that, it is abundance, but insidious in that is it's how you show you're an expert. It's how you establish
Right.
your expertise is, and this is especially true for women, right?
Mhm.
Is what we wear.
Yes. Yeah.
And women come under extraordinary scrutiny. Like if you look at like the political sphere or like the news sphere, media sphere, right? How women look, it's huge. And so it's a big part of that. And it's kind of like, okay, well, so how do we push back against that a bit and be like, I've worn this shirt a few times before. I can wear that shirt again. It's
Yeah.
okay. I mean, for a while,
Right.
like releasing a YouTube video twice a week, right? For a while there, I was like,
Right.
I need a different shirt every time. And then I'm like,
Right.
you know what? I don't.
Totally.
It's okay. People can deal with me wearing the same shirt. I don't think they're going to think I'm less intelligent because I'm wearing the same shirt. But I had that in my head. Oh, I can't show
Totally.
up in the same thing.
Yeah. When's the last time I wore this? Yeah,
Right.
totally.
Right. And here you are. Now you're doing a podcast every week, right? So you've got a new thing you need to be wearing. Well, you think you
Exactly.
might need a new thing to be wearing, right? But then you go, well, do I really?
How creative can I get with accessories?
How creative can I get? You know? And I think that, we have so much abundance. Those of us in the wealthier countries, those of us who are, in an economic sphere where we are able to buy stuff, I think it's really beneficial for us to do this kind of questioning because it actually helps us to get connected to what really matters to us. Because that whole thing
Yeah.
about what you're wearing, like what you're doing on stage, right? That's all persona,
Mm.
right? It's a persona. It's like what you want to project out, right? And the thing is it actually real? Does it feel like you? I
Right.
mean, through some of those trainings, Darla, and I've talked about this before. A lot of times I adopted a persona, didn't feel like me, but it was what I thought I needed to do. And I tried to manipulate the idea of the persona that I was given by our coach, to be like, well, can I make it work for me or not? So it wasn't like I totally bought into it, but there are aspects of it where I go, gosh, that was not me. And
Yeah.
it didn't feel good in the long run. And it impacted my success. It impacted my comfort. It impacted my happiness, and I just don't do that anymore. I'm like, screw it. I'm just going to, be me. Like one of my
Yeah.
things has been, I just want to be as transparent as I am. And I'm just going to show up as me. And yes, I like to put on a nice necklace and I do have a clean shirt on. But other than that, what I mean?
I love that. And I love that about you, Maggie. So let's talk a little about you and your journey to developing this body of work and really trusting yourself.
Well, like I said, I started working with sovereignty like in 1998. I actually remember exactly when it happened.
Was that when you were still at Columbia?
Had just left Columbia, or I was in the
Okay.
process of leaving Columbia, and I was working with a shamanic practitioner, and she's the one who introduced to me the idea of sovereignty. Because,
Mm.
shamanic practitioners, they work in multiple dimensions, right? And so we were just talking about my relationship to beings from other dimensions. And she was like, you need sovereignty of your energy field, right? You don't want any other, entities or whatever around in your field, right? And this was actually new information to me at the time because
Yeah.
I'd been an academic and I hadn't really thought about it, and I was like, ooh, So we worked a lot just to clear my field so that, and the truth is, a lot of people have little things in their org fields, and you want to be able to clear them out, right? And so that's why I was first introduced to sovereignty, and then like I said, over about the 15 years after that, I've used it as a concept and a tool working with clients and as being a part of my programs. It was really focused, the first four pillars in the book really focus on the inner landscape, right? Because it's like we build our sovereignty on the inside first. All of those pillars have been informed by things that I've done more recently, like in the last 5 or 8 years. But the core of it is always about how is this helping us to become more empowered on the inside? And how
Mhm.
can we unravel the conditioning that we have that leads us into either using power over, trying to control or manipulate situations or people in order to get what we want, to feel more safe, which is how pretty much all of us were trained to actually get along in the world, was to, to do that,
Totally.
or to be submissive, right? To give our power away, to follow other people's dictates, to look for outside of ourselves for recognition and so on, right? So we want to get rid of that disempowered and that power over and develop that power within, because when you build that power within, you just show up in the world differently. You're resilient, you're confident, you're resourced, you have the ability to tap into that inner guidance.
Yeah.
So that has been my journey, this whole time. But then pillar 4, which is about energetic mastery, is where a lot of the energetic practices come in, which I have studied those for a long time, different aspects of it, but the Kundalini yoga came in more the last 6 or 7 years. And just recognizing that understanding energy, and this is a beautiful place that you and I have kind of dovetailed, right? Is that really understanding energy is our next area of mastery, to build our mastery, right? And so that's why I love doing the energy practices and the different things that we do, because when we just try to make things happen in 3D world, we get exhausted, right? It's hard. It takes a lot of effort, and sometimes we don't even do it right. And then we're like, oh no, I put all this effort in and it's not really the thing. So when we can really work as energy first, it makes our lives easier. So all those pieces on the inner landscape, right? And I've continued to refine and evolve those. Then the other pieces were the second 4 pillars, which are about our purpose, our contribution, our communication, and how we can connect through communication rather than spar off, right? And collaborating with each other, working together on all the different challenges that arise when we really look at working together, and how we create mutually beneficial collaborations. Most of us haven't been involved in collaborations where it wasn't mutually beneficial. It benefited somebody or some party or some company more than others. So helping us to evolve that. And then the last is about stewardship, and about how do we take on that mantle of responsibility as mature human beings. That is really, in tribal cultures, that's a core thing that kids are taught, right? Adolescence is a time when you get taught how to be a responsible member of the community. And unfortunately, we don't have that in our non-tribal cultures so much anymore. And so a lot of our behavior comes because we didn't get that teaching and that holding by people that really were like, you need to understand that you have a responsibility to give back to the whole, balanced with your sovereignty on the inside. So it's not about just submitting to, either your boss or your family or, the government or whatever. It's not about giving that away, but it is about recognizing you have a role to play. And stepping up and into that role. So those pieces have gotten clearer and clearer and clearer. And like I said, when George Floyd was murdered in 2020, and we saw just like the response around the globe, it was so powerful to see so many people going, wow, something really needs to change here. Like, we really have an issue. And I never thought I would see that in the course of my life, even though my PhD is actually in African American studies and women's studies. So it's like, this has been a big part of my life, but for a lot of white people, it hasn't. And so that's also gave a lot of impetus to being like, wow, okay, if we're going to really change, how are we going to do that? And what are the pieces of that? And so that really influenced the last half of the book, as I was writing it.
It came in more strongly as you were writing.
Mm-hmm.
And you said, I've always been about personal empowerment and that inner alignment, which was the name of my retreat I used to market way back, if you remember. I guess I'm wondering where that came from. I know your mom was in the world of advocating for women, but Why sovereignty? Why do
Mm.
you feel like that's been your path?
Mm.
Has there been a time where you were so disconnected, like an awakening experience? Or does it feel like a seed that was planted? Or maybe it's
Well, both.
design.
I would say both. So I know in my family of origin, my dad, who was a professor, really trained my brother and me to question all authority except for his. So we eventually challenged his authority anyway, but just because he taught us to, he taught us to question. He was one of those educators. He was not like learn this thing and regurgitate it at all. He was like, what do you think? You gotta think. So he pushed us really hard to really look at things and be like, well, what are you actually doing here? And what's involved in that, right? And do you want to do that? And what's the consequences of that for you and for the people around you, right? So he really encouraged us to think deeply.
Mm.
And then when I was a teenager, my mother had her feminist awakening and she became a feminist activist. And my dad did too in his own way. And he certainly supported her activism. And she really brought into our family this recognition about how we had been trained into these gender roles that were not particularly satisfying and were really detrimental both to men and women. And so we started unpacking all of that, right? Consciousness raising in the 60s and the 70s, right? So
Mm.
that was kind of the beginning for me around personal growth was the feminist second wave of feminism looking at consciousness raising. So when I went to graduate school, I was definitely steeped in that. And that influenced me becoming a women's and gender studies professor and evolving even that into gender studies so that we're looking at the way culture defines who we are and how does that work and do we want to accept it or do we want to challenge it. So I had all of that going for me. But then when I was at Columbia and I had done everything that I thought I needed to do to create the success and the happiness and everything that I wanted. And I was being successful as a professor. I mean, I published my book, I was on lecture tours, I was publishing in journals, I was doing the things, right? But
Mm.
I was unhappy and I was getting sick and I was depressed. And I just was like, this is not, it's like, wow, I have been trying to get here and now I'm here. And I'm like, oh no. And I didn't really know what was wrong at the time. I just knew I had to get out. It was like my soul was just like, out. And I was like, oh, what? What? Oh, okay. And you know how the voice gets louder and louder, right? And then it eventually did. So that was definitely an awakening for me. And I stepped away from everything that I knew at that point because everything I'd done in my life led me to being a professor. So it was pretty scary, but it was also very energizing and exciting. And I've explored a lot of different things over that period of time, but I've been through a few different, and I think you have too, and probably our listeners do too. There's periods where, you get engaged in something and you're like, okay, this is the thing, because somehow we've been programmed to think if you just find your thing, that'll carry you
Mm.
through life, right?
Right.
No. Um, it might carry you through life for a while. I mean, there are
Right.
people for whom that's true. Like my dad was one of those people. But for most of us, we have these different periods in our lives and we might get into something and get engaged with it and be excited. Like that happened with me with clarity breath work, right? That was a whole new world. I was totally excited to be engaged in it. I did my own training. I had a practice. I trained other breath workers. And then I got to a point where I was like, huh, okay, something else.
Mhm.
What's next? Right?
Would you say that your leaving education was, or academia, was that it had just run its course, or was there a fundamental like mismatch?
Both,
Okay.
both. Yeah. Because on the one hand, I am well suited to that kind of intellectual work. I still consider myself a scholar.
Your book is very scholarly, like it's really
Yeah. I mean,
meaty,
I tried to make it for
meaty.
for everybody. It certainly doesn't have the kind of academic language I used to write, but
No,
it
it's
is.
great. I was just thinking I should take that. It's super easy to read and it's like
but it
very
is,
well researched and supported. And
yeah, it has a
yes.
scholarly tone to it for sure. So I do consider that, and I never consider it wasted effort, because getting my PhD and being a professor gave me skills that I still use because I've been teaching ever since. So it wasn't that, but so one of the things I learned when I came to human design, which really put my life into perspective, was I have a lot of what's called individual circuitry. And individual circuitry is here to be different. It's here to bring change. It does not fit in. And it's where the evolutionary impulse of humanity runs through the human design chart. So without needing to know anything about human design, when I realized I am primarily individual circuitry, I just went, oh, no wonder I don't fit in. No wonder I've never fit in. That's not my role. That's actually not my design. It's not my role. Because I didn't fit into academia. People, I always thought different. I was always coming up with scholarship that people were like, where did that come from? And why do you think about things that way? And I'd be like, well, to me, it was like obvious. I was like, well, of course.
It's your magic.
And then they'd be like, I just realized that it was going to be a really uphill battle for me to make my way in that world. And I just didn't want to do it. I was just like, I don't know. I was bored with that. So there was a mismatch in terms of my circuitry and who my human design is and that job. Like, I'm really not designed to work for anybody else. Like, that's part of my design. And so being, but then it really did run its course too. I got a lot out of it and I'm glad I left.
I've had various readings in human design, and you're the first person who introduced to me the idea of circuitry. And we have some of the same channels and things, and also very individual. And I can relate to having, and I'm sure I've shared this with you, wanting so much to be the person who has the tribal energy. And realizing over and over again, that's just not my path. But, there's something in, I'm thinking if this is true, well, for me, I just, would see visions of this is a tribe that we're building and not have something being like this when it came to executing some of the visions that I had. So human design was really helpful about that too.
Well, one thing I just want to throw a little caveat in there, which is that inside of human design, a lot of times interpretations that people receive are just about what we call their definition, which is the colored in parts of their chart, right? But I have a deep relationship to the sensing circuit, which I don't have defined in my chart. The embodiment, the creativity, the experiential nature, all of the storytelling, all of that. I developed a relationship to that part of the human design system, even though it's not colored in my chart. So I just want to say, and so this is why there isn't formulas, right? Everybody has to be like, well, how is that true for me? And like for me, as I said, individual circuitry, I'm not designed to work in a big institution. Like, I totally get that. And yet at the same time, I also have this relationship to something that's not defined in my chart. So you may not having tribal circuitry may lead you to realize, oh, you know what? It's not as easy for me as it might be. You could always partner with somebody who has tribal circuitry because that would help, right?
That's been my strategy.
Well, and it's a good strategy, right? Because you don't have to have it all. It's just good to have it in the environment, have somebody bringing that in. But it's also true that there are certain parts of the chart that you may develop a relationship with, even though you don't have a colored in on your chart. Does that make sense? Is that landing? Okay. It's a little complicated if you don't know human design.
I was just going to say, let's go just like a little bit higher up. And so for anyone who's dropping into this and they don't know human design, a couple sentences about what the system is. And then I'm going to ask you some more about your discovery and how you've woven it into the book, really.
Okay. Human design is a system that was gifted to us by an angel. That's the way I like to think of it. Ra called it the voice. And so it is a channeled system, and it brings together 4 different ancient wisdom traditions. So the I Ching, the chakra system, the tree of life from the Kabbalah, and astrology.
Astrology.
Astrology, right? So it brings these 4 together in a unique way. And it's the thing that draws me to it is it's like uncannily accurate. I mean, that's the thing that's crazy about it. You just
Yeah.
go, I mean, because I'm not really a systems person. Not so, you're way more of a systems person than I am. But when I really came into design, I was like, there is something really magical about this. Like, I can't explain it. People will be like, where did the, I'm like, I have no idea why it works. I just know that it does. But it's the same for me with my computer. I have no idea how my computer works either, but I know that it does. So it's a system that helps us to understand what some of our core energies are. And it also offers us a soul curriculum, which is how do we step into the highest expression, the most awakened, empowered expression of the different aspects of the human design system. So it helps us, for example, if you're a person who doubts a lot, right? There's a particular gate, the gate of doubt. How can you turn that into curiosity instead? Right. And so that's an aspect of your soul curriculum. Like because I've talked to people who come in and they're like, oh my God, I just doubt everything in my life. And I'm like, oh goodness, let's change that. Because that's so debilitating, right?
Yeah.
If you just doubt all the time, can you get curious instead? Because if you just think about it, doubt's kind of like, I doubt it. Whereas curiosity is like, huh, I wonder what's possible.
Yeah.
So that's part of how the soul curriculum works, is to be able to see the different qualities of energy and how can you move into that state where you really have agency, which is where it connects with sovereignty, right? Is to give you agency in life. Because if you're in a disempowered state, you don't really have agency, right? I mean, you've given your agency away to outside
Yeah.
forces.
I did my human design reading because our mutual mentor recommended it, and it was mind-blowing to me. Totally changed so much for me to see the ways I was operating conditioned. And there were a couple of particular insights, right, that really changed a lot for me. And you can study this forever, I think, but you didn't want to learn it. And then all of a sudden you became an expert. So do you want to share a little bit about
Yeah.
that?
Yeah. Well, so you and I were introduced to human design at the same time,
Yeah.
right? And I didn't get a reading. I went and I got, a printout, right? I got my
Mhm.
chart and I got one of those, whatever it was, $20
Yep.
printouts that said these different things about me. Well, so in my arrogance, I looked at it and I said, oh, I'm a generator. I'm designed to respond. And I was like, well, that's clearly inaccurate because I've been initiating my entire life. I'm an Aries sun. What could this possibly? No, this can't be right. So I dismissed it. Which
So
was
to respond is to let something outside of you come to you, and then if it's for you. Do you want to kind of distinguish that versus initiating?
Yeah, what I would say is that as a generator or a manifesting generator, I'm designed to be in a dynamic relationship with the creative intelligence of the universe. And this is partly where magic comes in, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because our magic, in my view, is a word that we give to the kind of miraculous things that can happen when we're in that dynamic relationship with the creative intelligence of the universe, right? And so responding is about having our aspirations, having our desires, the things that we're focusing on, and we're there. And then we're like, okay, flow of life, this is what I'm focusing. This is what I want. This is what I want to create. This is where I'm at, right? And then you look to see, what is the flow of life bringing me that I get to respond to? When I first did this, I mean, so my limited mindset, when I first did it, I was like, well, if I'm just going to respond to things, I don't initiate, nothing's going to happen. Like
Yeah,
that was definitely deeply ingrained in me. I'm not even sure exactly where that came from. I think it's pretty cultural.
for sure.
Because I was like, if it's to be, it's up to me. How is this something just going to happen? I was really like about that. And then when I finally came back to human design, and I was like, all right, let me lean into this responding thing. What I realized is I had stuff to respond to all the time. And that could be, I could be reading a book and come across a passage in a book. And I'd be like, oh, and it would like, I could feel it. And I'd be like, oh, is that something for me to respond to? And then my sacral authority would be like, oh, I should pay attention to this. Okay. So it could be that. It could be in a conversation with someone. It could be in an email. It could be something I saw in a video. It could be any of those things that I got to respond to. But when you get really in it, there is this magical quality, which I'm sure you've experienced, right? It's synchronistic, right? You're thinking about this thing, and the next thing you know, like in the next couple of days, you get an email about it, or somebody calls you up and says, I've been thinking about this about you. Would you be interested? And you're like, I was just thinking about that, right?
Yes.
So that's what that is. It's a way, maybe one way to think of it is, before I came to human design, I always thought it was a good idea to work with spirit, right? Because I've been doing spiritual work for a long time. I always thought it was great. And I found that my ability to do that was inconsistent, right? Sometimes I felt really aligned, really in the pocket, really in the flow. And then other times I would just be like, I don't know, I'm an isolated, little peon human not knowing what to do. You know what I mean? And I would just be like, and I was like, well, okay, so I could meditate, I could do the things that I knew, but I didn't really understand the mechanics of it, if you will. Right. And that's what human design is. It actually gave me the mechanics of how, as a generator, I'm designed to work with spirit. And that was so liberating to me. I was like, oh, this is how I do it. And the other thing is, not everybody's designed to do it the same way.
Yes.
Right. So there's somebody that you and I know, I won't necessarily name, but you and I know, who's a manifester, who, when she came to do a reading with me, she actually said, I kept looking for signs. I thought I was supposed to wait for signs, like, how are you connecting with the universe? Aren't I supposed to like look for the synchronicities and look for the signs? I'm like, no, you're a manifestor. You don't need a sign. You get to just initiate. And she was like, really? I was like, yeah. And she said it just liberated her, right?
Yeah.
Because she doesn't need to look for signs. I need to look for signs because that's, as a generator, right? That's what responding is. But for her, no, she didn't need to do that. But so much of the way that we're taught to live in life is to model other people.
Yes.
But if you don't know their design, a lot of times people try to model people who aren't good models for them.
Right.
Right. And then there you are trying to fit yourself. And this happens in business coaching all the time, Darla, right?
Totally.
That's why people are so blessed to come to you, because you know some human design and you're like, you don't need to fit into that thing. You're not designed to do that. Right. So that's a big piece of it too, is getting our individuality and knowing that, yes, we're all designed to dance with the flow of life. We're all designed to work with spirit, but we do it different. And when you get the way you do it, things start to drop into place. Yeah.
I love those examples. I'm thinking of at least 4 times this summer, I've been places where I had no idea why I was there. I just got the gut response to go, to show up, to take the step. And then, I would say half of them I know now why. And some of them I still don't, but I know it was right. There's a way in which, for me, with my mind and crown filled in and the line in between, it's like, choo, 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 figure out, plan. And that was one of the most liberating parts for me, was realizing that that's not where my truth is. And
yeah. And
be fun insights, but not really going to help me dance with the flow of life.
Well, what they say about making plans, right? How do you make God laugh? No. So there is a part of that. And we do need planning, right? I mean, planning has a place. But if we think that planning is the ultimate thing, that's really limiting, right? We don't plan until we get clarity in other ways about what it is that we want to plan, and then we do it, right? Yes. Yeah, absolutely. It's like being able to, it is a funny thing, Darla, that you're naming about, because when you start to really work with your authority, which is, so Darla and I are both generators, we have a certain kind of authority, is that gut response. It's the right, as when you really start to live by that, I'll give an example that I think people would relate to. So fairly recently, I watched a whole um, launch for somebody who I actually really liked her, and I really like what she's doing, and I really liked her program. I watched the whole thing, and I was like, she's awesome. This is great. And I wasn't convinced that I needed her program, but I sort of was. I was just enjoying her so much, and I thought, this might be a container that could be good for me to work on certain things. But I asked my sacral, right? I got to the end. I was like ready to buy, right? I get to the end of it, and my sacral's like, mm-mm. I'm like, really?
Mhm.
Mm-mm. Should I enroll in this program? Mm-mm. I'm like, oh, okay. So I didn't, right? And I'm like, oh, but I need some aspects of her program. Like there's some couple of things she
Mhm.
said you need to develop, and I'm like, I need those, right? Yeah. And I was like, okay, yes, I do need to work on those things, but I don't need the whole thing.
Mhm.
So I was like, okay, fine. So like 3 weeks later, month later, I start getting another. Actually, she promotes somebody else doing another launch, right?
Mhm.
And I'm like, interesting. And she's like, okay, go and check out this guy. So I did, and I'm watching this launch, and I'm listening to it, and I'm like, oh, I need to do his thing, not her thing, right? And I
Mm.
asked my sacral, I'm like, should I do this? It's like, mm-hmm. And it's like, oh, that's why I shouldn't. Mm-hmm. Now I didn't see that coming.
Yeah.
I didn't see that like my little human mind would never have been able to know that. But some part of my connection with my inner being, which is what that authority is, was the part that was like,
Yes.
no, 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 something else better is coming along. Something else that you actually need more is coming along. But I didn't know that. I just was following that inner guidance to say, not this. Oh, mm-hmm. And then it's like everything just fit, right? I went, oh,
Yes.
that's why it worked out that way, right? So that's the kind of thing where your sacral can protect you from jumping into things that could be great. I mean, it's not like her
Yeah.
program is great, right? But it
Yes.
wasn't the right thing for me at the right time. And that's what your mind cannot figure out, what your
Mhm.
analytical mind can't know, but your
Yeah.
intuition can know, your magic can know, right? And
Yes.
that's why it's so valuable, because we get inspiration and guidance from our multidimensional nature, right? And we don't, like, if I had said to myself, or somebody had asked me, well, why did you decide not to do that? What was, I'm
Yeah.
like, I don't know. It just what I just know it wasn't right. And some people will be like, well, that's stupid, you know.
Well, I mean, it's interesting in our culture where we're constantly asked to explain ourselves
Right.
to just say, like I remember when I moved to Denver ages ago and I saw mountains and it kept clicking like I had a response to pictures of mountains and I went, okay, I'm gonna find some mountains. And then people would say, oh, did you move here for work? No. Like it was a whole awkward conversation about why you moved because I
Yeah.
saw pictures of mountains
You didn't have
and then I
a
went.
rational explanation, right?
Exactly.
It's the same thing with me going to Costa Rica. It's like I do not I mean I kind of have a rational reason, but there's also like, but oh, this will make you laugh. You saw pictures of mountains. My bedspread has monkeys on it.
Mm.
And I realized that at a certain point I was like, "Oh, I've been getting the message, the sign, right, about moving somewhere with monkeys for a long time, that I didn't know that's what it was, right? And then
Yes.
when the opportunity to go to Costa Rica came in, my mind is like, are you friggin' kidding me? And but my heart and my sacral are like, so
Mhm.
I keep doing it, even though my mind is it's more settled now.
I
But yeah,
relate. I mean, here I am in the middle of mountains when you were talking about nature being out there. I'm like, earlier today, I was just delighting in the birds that just are everywhere here. They're so much prettier at altitude somehow. And I would have never predicted that I would be here. And it still makes no sense to me, but here we are. So,
right,
yeah,
right.
just like,
Why do we get led to
yes.
different places? And And my experience is sometimes we find out later and sometimes we don't.
Mhm.
And that's why like really working with that inner guidance, that inner magic, if you will, is it takes faith. It takes faith that there is a benevolent consciousness that is supporting us,
Yes.
and that's where this guidance and this information is coming from. And that, I know in my work with people, a lot of what we do is help them unravel their resistance and the ways that they tend
Mhm.
to just dismiss their own inner guidance and their own intuition and their
Yeah,
creativity because it doesn't fit into the world view that they, grew up
Mhm.
with and that they're living inside of.
Totally.
I'm sure that's a
Yes,
ton of what you do with people too, right? To help them get connected to their magic.
absolutely.
You have to unravel a lot of conditioning in order to get there. Mhm. But
Absolutely.
it's totally possible. I want to say, people, it's totally possible. And
It
you know what?
is. And
When
it
you do it,
sticks.
your life becomes so much easier. That's the thing I always like to say to people. Damn,
Yeah.
like to be easier.
Yeah.
Learn to
It's
tune
worth
in,
it.
right? So
It's
worth it.
worth it.
So worth it.
All right. So I want to direct people to femininesovereigntybook.com where they can get 50 pages of this
Yes.
book. You'll get hooked. Maggie, I just want you to know I'm putting this in my suitcase. I'm going on vacation in August to Dominican Republic and I'm taking it with me. I read the first half on my trip last summer, so I'm really excited. Tell people, what they can expect when they pop onto your list and get this book. By the way, Maggie weaves in aspects of human design into the book. And
Yeah.
I always
Yeah.
love that so much, like the practical ways that people can identify themselves, whether they have it filled in, like you said, or not.
hmm
It's
hmm
really great.
Yeah. Well, the whole first pillar, which is about co-creating with the flow of life, that is very much based in what we've just been talking about, or about our human design
Mhm.
strategy and authority, which is a very practical way of knowing how to work with your magic, right? Or how to work with
Mhm.
spirit. And so I love that piece. There's also Kundalini yoga in there because the yogis also have their perspective about how we co-create with spirit. And this is why we work with our
Mhm.
energy the way that we do in the yoga traditions, because that is partly how we're working with our spirit aspect.
Mhm.
So that first pillar is all about that. The second pillar is about emotional wisdom. Big contribution of human design there regarding the emotional solar plexus, which is a center that doesn't exist in the chakra system, just exists in the human design system. Hugely important to understand about that.
Mhm.
Really, really liberating when you understand about that. Then working in pillar 3, which is about our relationship to the natural world and our own vitality. The Kundalini yoga comes in strong there, but we also have aspects of our human design as well, because there's parts of the human design system that are about the living world, the 515 in particular,
Mm.
that channel. And then, human design is an energy system. So working with our energy mastery is very much based in human design and how we become more available to the energies that are actually there, but we tend to veil or suppress. For example, how do we do that?
Mhm.
But then also, how do we build energy, right? How do we become stronger and raise our
Mhm.
frequency, but become strong, energetic beings? And all of that is influenced by human design. And then the second half of the book as well, because there's a lot about purpose, how we communicate, because human design helps us also understand how our designs interface with each other, how we're influenced by each other's. So
Mhm.
that influences our communication. It influences our ability to work together and to collaborate together. Just like we were talking about a minute ago, where you were saying, we're talking about tribal circuitry, right? And I said, yeah, but you could just have
Mhm.
somebody with tribal circuitry on your
Yes.
team, right? That's a way that you're like, oh, I could, that comes into your world, and then your world becomes richer because you have people who have that, and you can tap into that. It's very much embedded in all of these different pieces. And even I've renamed one of the gates in human design stewardship, because I see it
Mm.
as stewardship. And that's kind of the core of a pillar 8. There's
Mm.
leadership markers. So there's all kinds of ways that human design gives us a lens to understand the qualities of sovereignty that the 8 pillars are really diving
Mm.
into. And the thing that I'll say is you do not have to understand or be, you don't understand under human design to read the book.
No.
A lot of times people read it and then they're like, oh, I want to find out more about human design. And that
Mhm.
might happen for you. But you don't have to understand it. I worked a lot to try to make it accessible for people who didn't understand human design. But it's really a path of personal and spiritual development for awakening people, awakening women. And it's very
Mm.
much, it's very systematic, it's very methodical.
Yes.
And you just get to, walk through the 8 pillars. There's a lot of supports for you as you're doing that to reflect and to grow yourself. And that's really the project of the book is how do we become the people who can be have agency, be change makers, help to heal our planet, help to heal our relationships with each other so that we can thrive, right? So that we can
Yeah.
thrive. And I think there's a lot of people out there who really want to know how to do that, but don't know, you
Mhm.
know. I think a lot of people who are in denial about what's going on the planet are there not because they don't care, but because they
Right.
don't know what to do.
Right.
Right? And they're so overloaded kind of in their own lives, that they're like, oh gosh, I don't know what to do about any of that. And then we
Yeah.
just kind of keep going
Yeah. I
because we got a lot
love
going
that,
on.
kind of where we started with when you really are in tune with your knowing and what's true, it's going to naturally guide you to make different choices
Hmm.
and without it feeling like a burden. It's
Hmm.
just becomes nature.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah,
Mm.
things just and you know this, Darla. I'm sure our listeners know this to some degree, right? It's like when you change your frequency, you change your vibration, you change your consciousness. Things you become aware of things that you literally did not have the
Yeah.
circuitry, the neurobiology to see before. It
Yes.
literally didn't exist for you because you didn't have the neurobiology that enabled you to perceive it.
Yes.
And this is what happens when we grow and evolve. New things become visible to us and accessible to us
Mm.
that when we were in a different stage of our consciousness, a different stage of our growth, we didn't. I love what Joe Dispenza says about this. He's like, it didn't exist for you before you knew about it. It didn't exist before you had the
Yes.
consciousness. It literally didn't exist. Right.
Totally.
And then all of a sudden you change your frequency and the waves start to come into form and they all of a sudden so they're particle and you're like, wow, there's a whole image there. There's a whole download there. There's a whole way of seeing things that I literally yesterday didn't see.
Right.
That is magic.
That is magic. 100%.
Yeah. So that to me is what feminine sovereignty is all about, is the path of being able to continue to create our own breakthroughs, to not wait until some life experience comes along and makes us go, oh gosh,
Mhm.
I need to reevaluate, but to
Mhm.
instead continually be like, how can I be excellent? How can I be more confident? How can I be the best person I can be? How can I step into my potential? Right? How can I realize what's actually available to me? Right? I mean, I have such a hunger for that,
Mm.
and so do you. Like it's one that
Mhm.
makes us soul sisters, right? Is we just
Yeah.
have a hunger for that, right? So I want to help awaken that hunger in as many people as I can.
I love it. Love it so much. We'll put the link below this video, femininesovereigntybook.com. You can go download a sample or just dive in and order it for your Kindle.
Mhm.
And yeah, you won't regret that. Follow Maggie. She's got a beautiful YouTube channel and really puts out amazing content around human design, especially, but all sorts of things. So
Mhm.
thank you. Thank you for
Yeah.
who you are in the world. Thank you for
Aw.
saying yes. Thank
Mm.
you for always seeing me in my highest.
Yes, absolutely.
Anything
And
you
thank
want to
you for
leave
asking.
people with?
Mm, I think you matter. You matter. How you think, how you feel, what you do,
Mm.
how you show up in the world, it really matters. I think a lot of us think it doesn't matter. Like what I do, it doesn't matter, or it doesn't matter beyond this some kind of limited sphere,
Mm.
right? But I really believe that we live in a holographic universe, and that as each of us steps into our sovereignty, as each one of us evolves ourselves to take on that mantle of stewardship, that there is a ripple effect, right? And
Yes.
that we create templates, right? Morphic fields that
Mm.
people can then step into by doing it. So
Mhm.
never doubt that your contribution matters, even if you're primarily a mom taking care of your kids right now, right? That is a
Yeah.
laudable thing to be doing in the world. I mean, what is more important than taking care of our kids, right? So just know, whatever you're doing, whatever your contribution is, it matters, and honor yourself.
Mm.
Don't allow yourself to be pulled down into doubt.
Beautiful.
Mhm.
Thank you so much. Thanks
Yay,
everyone
thank
for
you,
tuning
Darla.
in. We'll see you in the next episode.